Morgan Bennett stared at the faint glow of the hospital corridor lights as she cradled her newborn son against her chest. The rhythmic beeping of the IV monitor was oddly soothing, reminding her that she had made it through an excruciating childbirth. Her baby's soft cooing tugged at her heart, filling her with an indescribable love, and a tinge of worry about how Daniel would adjust to life as a father. Earlier that day, Daniel had been in the room, pacing, glancing at his phone every few minutes. She chalked up his distance to nerves about the delivery. They had talked, in the early days of their relationship, about the possibility of children. He hadn't seemed enthusiastic, but never outright opposed. So, when Morgan found out she was pregnant, she thought it was a surprise that would bring them closer. His lukewarm reaction should have been her first warning sign, but love can be blind, and she believed the arrival of their child might open Daniel's heart. A sharp vibration against the mattress startled her. The screen of her phone lit up. With the newborn dozing on her shoulder, Morgan carefully tilted the device to read the incoming text. Her eyes skimmed the words once, then twice. Morgan, good luck with that baby I never wanted. I won't be raising it. I'm getting some well-needed time away with my secretary. We have an ironclad prenup, so don't expect anything from me. My lawyer will be in contact in a few days with the divorce papers. She read it a third time, her breath catching in her throat. At first, her mind refused to accept the cruelty on the screen. She had just endured hours of labor, had just pressed her baby's cheek to hers, and now, this? She wanted to scream, to cry, to throw the phone across the room. But shock wrapped around her emotions like a vice. Could he really be serious? Daniel had always been distant, but never this callous. The thought crossed her mind that this might be some twisted joke. Yet Daniel wasn't answering his phone. His side of the hospital room stood empty. The staff had mentioned he left in a hurry. Morgan's eyes flicked to her sleeping son. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but she was drowning in betrayal. Her heart pounded, each beat hammering home that Daniel was gone, and he didn't plan to come back. Pain, disbelief, and desperation clashed in her chest. She inhaled deeply, tears threatening to spill. She reminded herself who she was, someone who had built a career in PR from the ground up before stepping back due to complications in her pregnancy. She was strong. She was capable. And if Daniel truly thought he could discard her like an old newspaper, he was in for a rude awakening. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, painting stripes of light across Morgan's bed. Despite the cheerful warmth in the air, a cold numbness persisted in her chest. Staff came and went, nurses checking vitals, a pediatrician stopping by to see how the baby was faring. But every time the door opened, Morgan hoped it might be Daniel. Perhaps he'd burst in, apologize for his cruel words, and blame it on stress. But the door never revealed him. Reality sank deeper with each passing hour. He'd left her, abandoned her and their newborn. Even the words felt unreal. Morgan's best friend, Kiana, rushed into the room, breathless and eyes full of concern. A petite woman with light brown skin and curly hair pinned in a messy bun, Kiana wasted no time. "Girl, what happened? Daniel texted me some nonsense about a vacation in the Bahamas, without you, and a secretary?" Morgan gestured weakly to her phone. "He's leaving me, and the baby." Kiana's jaw dropped. "He did what?" Fury blazed behind her eyes, but she tempered it for Morgan's sake. She placed a comforting hand on Morgan's shoulder. "Are you okay?" "No," Morgan said in a near whisper, tears pooling in her hazel eyes. "But I will be." She realized she needed time to process, to let the anger settle in. Right now, her baby needed her stable and calm. Numbing heartbreak might not be ideal, but it was better than complete meltdown. Kiana squeezed her hand. Let's get you home first. Focus on your health and your son. We'll deal with Daniel's mess later. Morgan exhaled slowly. She thought about how, before marriage, she'd been a PR powerhouse, someone who thrived on crisis management. Now she was in the thick of her own personal crisis. She could either break or rise to the challenge. The memory of Daniel's text replayed in her mind like a broken record. That part about the Ironclad prenup stung like a fresh wound. Of course, she recalled signing something, but she'd done so trusting Daniel's sweet words that it was just to protect family assets. Now she wondered what hidden clauses might be there. Would he really leave her with nothing? The nurse entered to check on Morgan's son. The baby stirred, letting out a soft wail. Morgan cradled him in her arms, feeling a surge of maternal protectiveness. She was determined not to let Daniel's cruelty overshadow the miracle she held in her arms. As the nurse departed, Kiana pulled out her phone. I have an amazing attorney contact. She's discreet and fierce. We'll figure this out. Morgan's gaze hardened, tears drying. I'm not letting him do this to me, Kiana, or to my child. He wants space? Fine. I'll give him all the space he needs to watch what real consequences look like. A small seed of resolve sprouted in her heart. Pain was fueling her strength. One thing was certain. Daniel had lit a fire in Morgan's soul, and she intended to make him regret every word of that text. Leaving the hospital should have been a joyous occasion. Instead, Morgan felt a hollow ache as she stepped through her front door, her newborn sleeping in an infant carrier. The apartment they had once chosen together now seemed foreign, the walls echoing with memories she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. She paused in the entryway, scanning the living room, the beige couch where Daniel would lounge on Sunday afternoons, the framed wedding photos on the mantel. Her gaze drifted to a large portrait from their honeymoon in Greece, both of them beaming at the camera, the turquoise sea behind them. Morgan bit her lip, recalling how she'd been so confident they'd be together forever. Before she could spiral deeper, the baby stirred with a soft whimper. She whispered soothing words, lifting him gently from the carrier and holding him close. The tiny weight in her arms reminded her of what truly mattered now. She was not alone. She had a new life depending on her. As she settled onto the couch, Kiana emerged from the kitchen with 2 cups of herbal tea. I know you probably want something stronger, she joked gently. But for now, this is best. Morgan mustered a small smile. Thank you. She took the tea, letting the warmth spread through her palms. Her mind churned with questions. Where was Daniel now? Was he really with his secretary, sipping cocktails in the Bahamas while she struggled with late-night feedings and postpartum pain? What's your next step, Morg? Kiana asked softly. Morgan shifted, adjusting her baby's blanket. I need to see that lawyer you mentioned. I want to know exactly what ironclad prenup I signed. A flash of anger rippled across her face. But more than that, I want him to know he can't treat me like this. I've handled major PR crises for corporate clients. Now I have a personal crisis. I'm going to handle it. Kiana nodded. That's the Morgan I know, but don't forget to take care of yourself too. The stress can be rough postpartum. A lump formed in Morgan's throat, but she swallowed it. I know. I'm trying. She cast a glance at the wedding photos on the mantel. In a way, looking at those hurts. But it also reminds me I'm not some timid housewife. I've got to pick myself up. The doorbell rang, startling them both. Morgan frowned, gently placing the baby in a bassinet. She approached the door and peeked through the peephole. A delivery person stood there with a small envelope. Cautiously, she cracked open the door. Yes? Package for Mrs. Bennett, the person said, handing over the sealed envelope. Have a nice day. Morgan's heart pounded as she saw the law firm's name in the corner. She barely closed the door before ripping the envelope open. Inside, a cold, formal letter. Daniel had initiated the divorce proceedings. There it was, in black and white, an unfeeling echo of his text. Tears threatened again, but something hotter. Fury won out. She steeled herself. If Daniel wanted a fight was exactly what he'd get. 2 days later, Morgan found herself in the office of attorney Vanessa Moore. The walls were lined with books on family law, and the scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air. Vanessa, a poised African-American woman in her early 40s, leaned forward, scanning the prenup documents with a keen eye. Morgan sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind bouncing between the newborn at home, safely in Kiana's care, and the suffocating tension in this room. She watched Vanessa's expression shift from neutral to mildly concerned. That wasn't a good sign. Finally, Vanessa set the papers down. It's pretty ironclad, she said, her voice measured. Daniel's family wealth is protected, and it appears you waived any right to spousal support unless you met certain conditions. She tapped a section on the final page. He included clauses specifically about not having children. Morgan's eyes widened. He put that in writing? That if I had a child, I'd get nothing? Vanessa nodded, sympathy in her gaze. It says if children were born during the marriage without both parties' mutual consent, the party initiating it gets no financial support. It's unusual and quite cold, but I've seen this kind of thing in high-asset families wanting to deter heirs they didn't plan. A wave of nausea hit Morgan. I didn't trap him. We were intimate. Birth control isn't foolproof. He never openly said he didn't want kids, just seemed hesitant. Vanessa sighed. Legally, it's going to be an uphill battle, especially if the child is unplanned. But we can fight it on the grounds of the emotional duress you were under when you signed, or that you didn't fully understand the clause. Morgan breathed in, steadying her nerves. I'm not giving up. The lawyer offered a thin smile. I didn't expect you would. There's also child support to consider. Even if the prenup covers spousal matters, it generally can't override state child support laws. Morgan nodded, relief sparking. So he won't just walk away scot-free? Vanessa leaned back in her chair. Exactly. Daniel can't waive his legal obligation to the child, no matter what that prenup says. Morgan felt a flicker of hope. Then let's go after that. He wants to abandon us? Fine. But he doesn't get to walk away without consequence. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. You sure you're ready for a fight? These things can get ugly. Morgan set her jaw, her hazel eyes gleaming with determination. He wants a war. He'll get one. Leaving the office, Morgan clutched the folder of legal documents. Anger coursed through her veins, but so did a newfound sense of purpose. She might not be able to nullify the prenup easily, but ensuring Daniel took financial responsibility for their child was non-negotiable. Stepping out into the brisk air, she glanced at the sky, gray clouds overhead. It might storm soon, she thought, a fitting backdrop to the battle she was preparing to wage. As she walked, she couldn't help imagining Daniel somewhere tropical with his secretary, living it up without a second thought for his wife and newborn. The fury in her heart solidified into resolve. She would protect her child and herself, no matter what it took. That evening, Morgan rocked her baby to sleep in the soft glow of a bedside lamp. His tiny hand curled around her finger, drawing her mind into sweet nostalgia of how she'd once believed Daniel was the perfect partner. Memories played like a film reel. Their first date. Daniel showed up in a sleek suit, charming her with stories about his investment deals. She, in turn, captivated him with her quick wit and knowledge of marketing trends. Their wedding day, the floral arrangements in shades of ivory and gold, the soulful R&B playing as they danced their first dance. Daniel had been so gentle, so seemingly devoted. Their honeymoon in Greece, a paradise of turquoise waters and sandy beaches. Daniel surprised her with a private boat tour. She remembered the sun in his eyes as he kissed her forehead. Now, those images twisted painfully in her heart. He was the same man who sent a text to abandon her in a hospital bed. The contradiction stung deeply, but with every sting, Morgan felt her spine straighten. If love had once blinded her, heartbreak would sharpen her view. Settling the baby in his bassinet, she quietly walked to the living room, where a folder of documents and her laptop waited. A new sense of direction fueled her. No more illusions, no more heartbreak without action. She opened her laptop and began compiling every piece of information she had on Daniel, his business ventures, his assets, anything that might be relevant. She was no stranger to crisis management, and if he thought she would roll over and crumble, he was wrong. A soft knock on the door made her glance up. Kiana peeked in, carrying dinner. "Hey, I figured you might forget to eat." Morgan smiled gratefully. "You know me too well." Kiana placed the container on the coffee table. "Any progress?" Morgan rubbed her temples. "Legally, it's tricky. The prenup was thorough. But Vanessa, my lawyer, thinks we can at least secure child support. Plus, I have some ideas." Kiana raised an eyebrow. "Ideas?" Morgan leaned in, voice hushed. "I built my career handling PR nightmares, right? Daniel's new startup is on the verge of a big investment round. If word gets out that he abandoned his wife and newborn in the hospital..." She let the implication linger. Kiana blinked, stunned. "You'd go public?" Morgan exhaled. "I never wanted to be vindictive. But he left me with no choice. If he wants to destroy my life, I'll fight back in the court of public opinion, where I excel." Kiana nodded slowly, understanding. "Just be careful. That can be a double-edged sword. He might retaliate." Morgan's hazel eyes flashed. "Let him try. I'm done being the victim in his story." And so, as the baby slept, Morgan's plan began to take shape. She would gather evidence of Daniel's abandonment and time it carefully. She'd make sure he couldn't hide behind legal technicalities or fancy lawyers. Her heartbreak was transforming into determination, powered by each memory of what Daniel used to be, and the betrayal he'd become. The next morning, Morgan stared at her open laptop, a meticulously written statement glowing on the screen. She was about to reveal her personal turmoil to the world, an audience that had once admired her polished PR campaigns. Now she was turning the spotlight on herself, and, by extension, Daniel. Her post began with a heartfelt account, how she met Daniel, fell in love, and supported his ambitions while building her own career. Then it delved into her pregnancy and the day of the child's birth, the day Daniel's betrayal arrived via text message. She included no direct threats or slander, just the cold, hard truth of what had happened. Kiana hovered nearby, peeking at the screen. "You sure about this? Once it's out there, you can't take it back." Morgan inhaled, her heart hammering. "I'm sure. I'm not out to destroy him. I just want the world to see who he really is. He can't silence me with a prenup." With one final keystroke, she published her post. Almost immediately, notifications began to light up. Former colleagues, friends, and even distant acquaintances expressed shock, outrage, and sympathy. Others asked for more details, offering help or legal advice. A few trolls made snide remarks, but that was the nature of the internet. Morgan was prepared. Within hours, her story gained traction. Daniel Bennett, a rising star in the investment world, was suddenly trending for all the wrong reasons. Morgan could almost imagine him in a luxury hotel suite, scanning his phone with horror. And indeed, that afternoon, she received a barrage of texts from an unknown number, likely Daniel's new personal line. The messages ranged from furious to pleading, but Morgan ignored them all, letting them sit like unread confessions. She did, however, answer one call. Vanessa, her attorney. "Morgan," Vanessa said, voice taut, "I'm seeing the coverage." "How do you want to play this legally?" "Daniel's lawyers are bound to call me any minute." Morgan leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing her arms. "We stick to our facts. We aim for child support. And if Daniel wants to talk settlement, I might consider it. If the terms are right." Vanessa hesitated. "You realize this could complicate the divorce proceedings?" "It might," Morgan conceded. "But Daniel escalated things when he abandoned me and his child. I have every right to speak my truth." Over the next few days, Morgan's story spread. Journalists reached out, some from major media outlets. She gave a single interview, carefully stating the facts without resorting to venom. That's all it took. The public's outrage at Daniel's cold-hearted abandonment was fierce. In the midst of the whirlwind, Morgan found a moment of quiet, holding her son close. She whispered, "I'm doing this for us. You deserve a father who cares, but if he won't be that man, then I'll make sure you're not left wanting." She felt a strange mixture of guilt and vindication. Part of her still mourned the sweet love she'd once known. But the rest of her was resolved. Daniel would face consequences for discarding her and their child. And if public scrutiny was what it took to ensure he couldn't slip away quietly, so be it. It didn't take long for Daniel to retaliate. Morgan heard from mutual acquaintances that he'd returned from his vacation, if it was ever a real one, and was holed up in his office, raging about the bad press. One afternoon, as Morgan nursed her baby, her phone buzzed repeatedly on the coffee table. She ignored it initially, but the barrage became impossible to tune out. Reluctantly, she answered on the 10th ring. "Morgan," Daniel's voice spat out, "what the hell do you think you're doing? You're destroying my reputation." Morgan's chest tightened. The audacity of this man, to call her as if he were the victim. "You did that on your own," she replied quietly, mindful not to wake the baby. He exhaled sharply. "Look, you had to know I never wanted kids. That post you made was a cheap shot. I can sue you for defamation." Morgan almost laughed. "Defamation? You sent me a text while I was in a hospital bed, telling me you never wanted the baby and were leaving me for your secretary. Everything I said is true." He hissed a string of curses. "You're going to regret this." "Really?" she said calmly. "Because, last I checked, the only person regretting anything right now is you. By the way, your lawyer should be getting the official child support petition soon." She hung up, her hands trembling. It wasn't easy confronting him, but she refused to back down. The baby stirred at the tension in her voice, and she rocked him gently. "It's okay," she whispered, as much to herself as to her son. Later that day, Kiana stormed in with her phone in hand. "Girl, have you seen this? Daniel's putting out statements claiming you trapped him with a pregnancy. He's playing the victim." Morgan's stomach churned. She pulled up the article on her own phone. It quoted Daniel extensively, painting a picture of a naive young investor ensnared by a woman looking for a payday. It was full of half-truths, but it played on damaging stereotypes. She clenched her jaw. I knew he'd stoop low. But this? So he wants war. Kiana placed a hand on Morgan's shoulder. Remember what you said. No slander, just facts. That's your power. Don't descend to his level." Morgan nodded, inhaling steadying breaths. The best approach was a calm, consistent message. Her phone pinged with a new email from a journalist requesting a second interview. Morgan tapped out a response, setting the record straight about Daniel's false claims. By evening, Daniel's PR stunt had backfired. Screenshots of his text messages to Morgan leaked. Someone from Morgan's circle must have shared them with a journalist. Public sentiment skewed heavily in her favor again, condemning Daniel for his callousness. Morgan watched the social media storm from the vantage point of her living room, baby sleeping peacefully in a portable cradle. She felt a bittersweet satisfaction. This wasn't the life she'd wanted, tearing down her own husband's reputation. But Daniel had forced her hand. Now the stakes were even higher. She was fighting not just for financial security, but for her dignity, and for her child's future. Late that night, Morgan couldn't sleep. A single lamp in the living room illuminated the stacks of paperwork scattered across her coffee table. Among them lay the divorce papers, Daniel's scathing public statements, and her own preparations for the child support case. The baby's soft coo from the bassinet momentarily calmed her racing thoughts. But once he settled, her mind returned to the gnawing ache of betrayal. Despite her fierce public stance, she was human. She had loved Daniel deeply. She couldn't erase those feelings overnight. She remembered the day Daniel proposed. It was at a downtown jazz club, the sultry notes of a saxophone swirling in the air. When he got down on one knee, she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Now, it felt like another lifetime. Morgan swallowed a lump in her throat. She realized she'd been living on adrenaline these past days, anger and survival instincts pushing her forward. But what would happen when the dust settled? Would she be left with sorrow too heavy to bear? Kiana's voice echoed in her mind. Remember to take care of yourself. She closed her eyes, taking a moment to breathe. Her heart thudded with a conflicting mix of longing for what was lost and determination for what needed to be done. A gentle knock at the door startled her. She rose, carefully stepping around the baby's cradle, and opened the door to reveal her older brother, Jerome. With the same caramel undertones in his complexion and an empathetic gaze, Jerome stepped in, a bag of groceries in one arm. "Mama told me to check on you," he said softly. "She's worried." Morgan bit her lip. "I'm fine. Just dealing with everything." Jerome set the groceries down and pulled her into a hug. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he murmured. "It's okay to be hurt." For a moment, she let herself rest against her brother's shoulder, silent tears slipping free. In his familiar embrace, she remembered simpler times, family barbecues, holidays with laughter filling the house. Those memories bolstered her fragile spirit. When she finally pulled away, Jerome handed her a tissue. "Ma said she can come stay with you for a while if you want. Help with the baby." Morgan shook her head gently. "Not yet. I need to stand on my own feet for now. But I appreciate it. Thank her for me." Jerome nodded, understanding. After catching up for a while, he left, leaving Morgan with fresh groceries and a renewed sense of familial love. She glanced at her baby, sleeping serenely. "This child is my future," she thought. Daniel made his choice. Now I have to make mine. She sank onto the couch, flipping open her laptop one more time. There were still statements to draft, legal documents to review, but she paused to open a blank document. Quietly, she began typing out her feelings, journaling the pain, the memories, the hope for tomorrow. Because beneath the rage and the legal battles, there was a wounded heart that needed healing, and writing was her first step toward that healing. The day of the temporary custody hearing arrived with a crisp morning chill. Morgan left her baby with her mother at home, bracing herself for the confrontation she'd been both dreading and anticipating. The courthouse corridors smelled of disinfectant and freshly printed paper, an odd mix that made her stomach churn. Dressed in a tailored blazer and slacks that she barely fit into after childbirth, Morgan clutched her folder tightly. She spotted Vanessa Moore down the hall, the attorney wearing a confident expression. "Ready?" Vanessa asked. "As I'll ever be," Morgan replied, her hazel eyes scanning for Daniel. She didn't have to look far. He stood near the entrance, sporting a sleek navy suit. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his set jaw. Gone was the charming smile she once loved. In its place was a steely glare. The hearing was brief but intense. Morgan's legal team presented evidence that Daniel had abandoned her and the child immediately after birth. Daniel's side argued that Morgan had unilaterally decided to keep the baby, violating their understanding. Yet, the judge wasn't swayed by Daniel's emotional pleas about being blindsided. Legally, child support was mandatory. When the judge ruled for a temporary child support order, pending a final decision, Morgan felt a surge of relief. Daniel's expression soured, and he muttered something under his breath before storming out of the courtroom. Vanessa gently patted Morgan's arm. "That's a win for now, but we've still got the final hearing to tackle." Morgan nodded. "Baby steps. At least I know he can't just wash his hands of us." Outside the courtroom, Daniel tried to catch Morgan's eye, but she ignored him, focusing on her phone as she texted Kiana the good news. She refused to engage with his wounded pride. If he wanted to talk, he could talk through his lawyer. Later that evening, Morgan returned home, greeted by her mother's warm smile and the baby's bubbly coos. She scooped her son into her arms, pressing a kiss to his forehead. A sense of victory, however small, swelled within her. Her mother, a petite woman with wise eyes, gently touched Morgan's arm. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know this is hard, but you're doing what you must." Morgan managed a genuine smile. "I still love him, Ma. Or maybe I love who I thought he was. But I can't let that stop me from protecting our child." Her mother nodded. "Love can be complicated. Just remember you have your family behind you." That night, after everyone was asleep, Morgan found herself standing by the window, staring at the city lights. She thought about the future, raising her child alone, rebuilding her career, perhaps finding someone who valued her. The concept of happiness felt far away, but not impossible. For the first time since Daniel's departure, she let a small sense of peace settle in her chest. The anger and pain were still there, but hope was beginning to take root, making room for the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. Several weeks passed, and life began to shift in ways Morgan couldn't have predicted. She returned to freelance PR work, leveraging her network of old contacts. The news of her personal struggles ironically drew prospective clients who admired her resilience. With every new contract, she felt a piece of her confidence return. Her baby grew healthier, brighter, responding to her voice with toothless grins that made every sacrifice worthwhile. Family and friends rallied around her, showering her with support and resources. The bitterness toward Daniel still simmered, but it no longer consumed her every waking moment. One day, she found herself sitting in a sleek conference room with a new client, a mid-sized tech startup in need of crisis management. As she spoke about strategies and campaigns, her mind flashed back to the last big PR project she'd handled before pregnancy. She had been unstoppable then, and she was unstoppable now. When the meeting ended, the CEO, a middle-aged woman with bright eyes, shook Morgan's hand. "You've got a powerful story, Morgan. We respect that kind of strength. Welcome aboard." That evening, Morgan stared at the contract she'd just signed. It was lucrative enough to cushion her finances for months. She recalled Daniel's sneering mention of their prenup, his belief that she'd be helpless without him. Yet here she was, carving out a path on her own terms. In a final twist of fate, Daniel's startup collapsed under the weight of negative publicity and a failed deal. Morgan heard whispers that the investors had pulled out, citing ethical concerns. She felt no glee at his downfall, just a sense of karmic inevitability. He'd sown the seeds of his own ruin. On a crisp Saturday morning, Morgan decided to take her baby to the local park. Sunlight danced through the leaves as she strolled along the winding path, the stroller gliding over pavement. A gentle breeze carried the laughter of children playing nearby. She found a quiet bench and lifted her son into her arms. His bright eyes stared up at her, filled with innocent wonder. Morgan smiled, tears of gratitude shimmering. She had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and the fear of an uncertain future. She had discovered her inner strength, rediscovered her professional fire, and proven she could be both mother and fighter. As she kissed her son's forehead, she whispered, "We're going to be okay, better than okay." And she believed it. Life wasn't perfect, and healing would take time, but she was free. Free to love her child without the shadow of a partner who refused to be a father. Free to build her empire again, and free to open her heart someday to someone who deserved it. In that moment, Morgan felt a sense of resolve. Daniel might never truly understand the depth of what he'd lost, but she no longer needed him to. She had gained something far more precious, a renewed sense of self-worth, a beautiful child, and a future bright with possibilities. If you enjoyed this twist-filled journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories by Laine for more unforgettable drama and surprises. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for watching, and remember, twists you will not see coming await in every chapter.